In the Podkarpacie province, on the Przemyśl foothills, in this charming corner of our homeland, among beautiful hills and forests, the picturesque village of Golcowa stretches along the Golcówka stream. The village and the parish of St. Barbara in Golcowa date back to the 15th century. The territory on which the village and the parish were founded belonged to the property of the Bishop of Przemyśl. On April 18, 1425, the first location privilege was granted by Bishop Janusz, who allowed Wojtek, son of Paweł, and the mayor of Domarac to set up a village called Nowy Domarac, today part of the village of Golcowa, in the forests along the Łączka stream. According to the Historical Geographic Dictionary of Polish Lands, in the Middle Ages published in Sanok, Łączka stream, today called Golcówka, is the right tributary of the Stopnica River, which flows into Domarac. The land's owner right of privilege undoubtedly applied to the village of Golcowa and presumably its lower part. This is indicated by the privilege of another bishop of Przemyśl, Piotr from Chrząstków, on June the 25th, 1448, to establish the village is also in the woods above the Łączka stream, which is to be called Piotrawin. The privilege for the location was awarded to Maciej Golec, the mayor of Golcowa Wola. The names Nowy Domarac and Piotrawin given to both villages did not survive, as in 1448 Golcowa Wola was named first, and in 1468 both were called Golczów or Golczowska Wola. The current Golcowa village, which buildings stretch along the Golcówka stream, was created from the two villages. A special place in the local community is occupied by the historic church complex, which is a sign of the spiritual and material culture of the inhabitants of Golcowa, but also a showcase of the village and the testimony of its history and cultural identity. The historic church complex in Golcowa includes historic wooden parish church St. Barbara from the 15th century, wooden granary treasure chest from 1922, a brick belfry from 1903 and their surroundings. The parish church of St. Barbara in Golcowa. The exact time of construction of this church is unknown. According to some sources, its creation can be associated with the second stipend of the parish in 1448, and according to the others, it was probably built in 1482. In the description of the Golcowa church, prepared by the priest Jan Lisiński at the beginning of the 20th century, we read the following note. According to a very old act written on parchment, placed in the sacristy, the church in Golcowa was built around 1448 under the invocation of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary and St. Barbara, and was consecrated by Bishop Wojciech Baranowski on the first Sunday after St. Francis of Assisi in 1589. Until the second half of the 19th century, the church underwent slight transformation, but without a major impact on the shape of the body. It was not until around 1872 that the wooden arcades surrounding the building on three sides were pulled down, the so-called Saturdays. It was covered with boards, the church was raised by one foundation, a turret was built for a signature, and porches were added. A thorough reconstruction took place in 1885–87, when the nave was extended by 16 cubits, 9.60 meters westwards. The roof shingles were replaced with metal sheets, and the interior was divided into three aisles using two rows of wooden poles and decorated with polychrome interior by Jan Tabinski. In the years 2007-2009, another thorough renovation of the church body was carried out. Some foundations and beams were replaced, damaged elements of the roof construction were replaced, a new turret was reconstructed, the entire roof was covered with titanium zinc metal sheets, and the building walls were covered with new shingles. The electrical installation was replaced in the entire church, and fire and anti-burglar systems were installed. In 2014-2018, intensive conservation and renovation works were carried out inside the shrine, polychromes and moving elements of the historic church. As a result of these works, several later repaints of the walls were removed, and the paintings were brought back to Tabinski's polychrome, while the altar and pulpit were recreated using the original colors. The currently renovated historic church has regained its original splendor and brilliance. It is also a testimony to the culture and art of the past centuries, and still serves the function of an active parish church, in which devotion is exercised. The parish church in Golcowa is one of the oldest monuments of late Gothic sacred architecture in the Podcarpathia region. It is located on the wooden architecture trail of the Podcarpathia province. This is a wooden church in the Gothic style, built of large timber. During its construction, a rafter clasping system was utilized. That is a horizontal lock technique using one of the oldest systems of wooden church construction. Although it has been modernized many times, it still retains fragments of the old construction to these days. Particularly noteworthy is the very well preserved oak roof truss structure. The roof truss on the church is not homogeneous. Above the sanctuary and nave, the original oak rafter framing has survived from the time of the construction of the church, dated in the second half of the 15th century. A part added thereby extending the nave also preserved the original rafter framework from the time of expansion, dated in the second half of the 19th century. Carpentry joints are pinned. On the older part of the truss, from the time of church construction, a set of markings have been preserved. Carpentry marks in the form of notches, with a chisel with a half-round finish, length from 3 to 4 cm and a depth of about 0.5 cm, and the amount corresponding to the truss sequence of the sanctuary from east to west, are always placed on the binding side and usually a short distance from it. Above the newer part of the carpenter's truss frame, there are no visible numbers of girders, Arabic numerals 1, 3, 5, 7 on crowns. We are located in an old historic parish church. The current interior of the church is divided in a natural way into the sanctuary and the nave and two aisles. The flat ceiling as well as the roof structure rest on the walls and on 6 wooden pillars, 3 on the right and 3 on the left, with Doric-styled caps. At the back of the church there is a choir area supported by 2 pillars. Between the sanctuary and the nave is the so-called rainbow, i.e. the beam on which the Great Cross from around 1690 is placed, with the image of Jesus crucified. The walls are reinforced and covered with shingles. In the sanctuary there are 4 Gothic windows, enclosed by an arch in the shape of a donkey's back, beveled, while rectangular window in the aisle. The outside walls are reinforced and shingled. Under the eaves of the sanctuary roof, decorative beveled brackets, also visible in the attic from the north, above the sacristy, and in the aisle above the glare. The church is currently 28.5 meters long, not counting the vestibule, and its width is 9.7 meters. Particularly noteworthy is the equipment of the church, exceptionally rich and at the same time complete, which shows the way in which the medieval shrine was furnished, adapting inconsistently to its interior objects, neither temporally nor stylistically, and yet coexisting with each other and corresponding to the peak phases of the development of Polish art in the most important artistic centers. Quite detailed information about the church and parish church in Golcowa is given to the visit of Bishop Sierakowski from 1745. It allows you to determine the appearance and furnishing of the church. In this description, among others, we read that visited in 1745, the church was a wooden building on a stone foundation, with a shingle roof, on which there was a turret with a tower. The floor of the church was a stone floor. The ceiling was painted. A bell tower covered with shingles and 2 bells stood in front of the entrance. The great carved altar, made of wood, housed a painting depicting the presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. A carved tabernacle was also made of wood. There was an entrance door on both sides of the altar. At the steps of the great altar, on the side of the Gospel, i.e. on the left side, a piscine stone basin with a covering was dug into the ground. In addition to the altar, the great church also had 4 side altars. The altar of Our Lady of Częstochowa, painted white, St. Barbara in red, St. Joseph in blue, and a very old altar with a picture of the bishop also painted blue. All the altars were carved in wood. At the wall, on the Gospel side, there was a wooden pulpit painted red. Beside it there was a stone baptismal font with a cauldron and a wooden lid on top, covered with an iron rod. Between the sanctuary and the nave there was a rainbow with a cross and the image of Christ, 2 figures of saints on both sides of the cross, an 8-part organ with 2 bellows set on a wooden choir. Moreover, the interior of the church was filled with 13 wooden benches and 1 confessional. All 5 windows were bound in lead. In the wooden sacristy with two windows, bound in lead and barred, stood a wooden table with cabinets and drawers for dishes and liturgical vestments. In the whole interior of the church after 1887, when works related to the enlargement of the church were completed, a new polychrome was made, the author of which is the painter from Rzeszów Jan Tabiński. Walls and ceilings are covered with painted architectural divisions and with ornamental decoration, as well as historicizing figural scenes. A polychrome in sanctuary is created by four paintings on the walls, painted in 1931 by the painter Marian Stroński. They correspond to the style of Young Poland, modeled on the environment of Krakow artists. These are The Last Supper according to the French school, St. Francis of Assisi, St. John of God, and Heart of Jesus. On the flat ceiling of the sanctuary we can see a large picture of Our Lady of the Immaculate. On the eastern side, the sanctuary is closed by a three-sided apse. After removing the secondary repairs, fragments of the original Gothic painting's decoration were unveiled there. On the southeastern wall, probably the earliest emblems, and a fragment of the decoration resembling a kind of curtain are clearly visible. In the aisle, the polychrome consists of two large paintings on the ceiling: Christ with the Evangelist, the crowning of the Blessed Virgin Mary by the Holy Trinity. Probably they are not offered by Jan Tabiński, because others similar in stylistics were discovered under existing paintings. They are located both on the ceiling in the original part of the church and in the build-up in 1885-87. Since Jan Tabiński painted the church after enlargement, his paintings should be the first layer in the added part of the church, and here it turns out that the visible image of the crowning of the Blessed Virgin Mary by the Holy Trinity is not directly on the wood, but there is another older picture under it. Perhaps, therefore, the paintings painted by Tabiński in about 1887 are now under the visible paintings, which are perhaps offered by Marian Stroński, a painter from Przemyśl. On the walls behind the altar of Our Lady of Perpetual Help and St. Barbara preserved unpainted original Gothic paintings, directly on wood. Fragments of various scenes are visible, including two figures, plan elements, divisions, fragments of letters, and the figure of a devil breathing fire. Behind the altar of St. Barbara, the inscription kept. In 1887, the church was painted. The host Jan Mendyka from Dębca number 57. However, at the altar of St. Barbara, at the back, there is another inscription written in pencil with the following: repaired by Jan Mendyka from Dębca in Golcowa number 57 in 1880. boards on which the image of the Mother of God with Joachim and Anna was stretched, an inscription in pencil was found at the back. It was painted in 1624 and renewed by Jan Mendyka from Debrza in Golcowa in 1882. There are 4 easel paintings on the walls of the nave. Mother of God, Jackowa, picture from 1768. There is oil on canvas. St. Barbara, a painting from 1850. It is oil on canvas. St. Hyacinth, painting from the turn of the 17th and 18th century. It is oil on canvas. St. Stanisław Kostka, painting from the end of the 17th century. It is oil on canvas. Inside the church there are 4 altars: the main altar, 2 side altars, and the altar of Infant Jesus in the sanctuary. In the sanctuary on the eastern wall there is the main altar from 1628, in the style similar to the Romanesque style, rebuilt in 1785, decorated with numerous sculptures. At the top there is a small picture of the Holy Trinity. On the sides there are sculptures of St. Lawrence and St. Stanisław Bishop, also from 1628. In the middle part there are 3 images. A permanent picture, the Mother of God with Joachim and Anna, from 1628, presents Joachim and Anna with a small Mary in the middle, and God the Father in the clouds above them, and the Holy Ghost dove. It is oil on canvas. Picture of the Holy Family on the curtain from about 1750 presents Mary spinning thread, standing figure of baby Jesus with a cross in his left hand, and Joseph woodworking, against a landscape with brick architecture. It is oil on canvas. Image of Our Lady of Sorrows, on the bold bearing the reference number in the lower left corner, Z. Bogdański, 1952, Domarac, purchased in 1956, depicts the figure of a sorrowful Mother of God, and 7 swords of sorrow stuck in her heart. In the background, a view of Jerusalem, and the cross on a Golgotha. It is oil on canvas. Below the pictures there is a tabernacle from about 1756, the upper part of which is revolving. There is a cross with the image of Christ in it. On the sides there are small figures of angels. On both sides of the main painting there are 2 gilded columns, finished with carved heads, and between them, in the hollows, 2 carved statues of St. Peter and Paul from the early 19th century. On both sides of the setting there are richly carved ornaments and sculptures of angels from around 1756. Altar table, or so-called mensa, is of 1 piece of stone covered with wood. Below there is an antependium which represents a heart burning with a thorny crown, topped with a flame of fire, and a cross in the center, surrounded by a plant shoot. and kneeling winged figures of angels. This is a picture oil on canvas from the early 19th century. In the right nave of the church, there is the side altar dedicated to the church. Our Lady of Perpetual Help from 1628, rebuilt in 1720. It has a built-in tabernacle and richly gilded and carved columns. In the main field there is a picture of Our Lady of Perpetual Help painted on a lime board, gilded. On the gate there is a painting of Saint Joseph painted on canvas by a painter from the Society of Fine Arts of St. Luke in Krakow, Antoni Zębaczyński, in 1890. In the left nave of the church there is the side altar dedicated to Saint Barbara, from 1628 and rebuilt in 1720. The image is visible in the main field of the setting of Saint Barbara, patron of the church, in a wooden gilded dress. The painting shows a standing figure of a sun in a long dress and a crown on her head, with a palm in her left hand and a chalice in the right, against the background of a schematic landscape with a tower. It is oil on canvas from 1628, a dress from 1720. On the curtain there is a picture of Sacred Heart of Jesus and Saint Małgorzata Maria Alakow, donated by the vicar priest Maximilian Hajduk in 1893. This picture was painted by Antoni Zębaczyński from Krakow. On both sides of the painting there are 4 columns gilded with a rich carved ornament. At the top of the altar there are 2 figures of angels from 1720. On the southern wall of the sanctuary there is the side altar of the baby Jesus, in the pseudo-Baroque style. In its main field there is a niche enclosed with Corinthian columns with a figure of the infant Jesus, dressed in robes with a crown on his head. This figurine is a copy of the miraculous stature of Jesus, so-called Jezulatka, located in the Carmelite sanctuary of the infant Jesus in Prague. In the upper part of the altar, in the main field, a painted image of the bust of Saint Teresa of the child Jesus. The altar of the infant Jesus was made by the carpenter Michał Tomoń from Gwoźnica Dolna in 1948-49 at the request of the parish priest Tadeusz Świrat, at the instigation of Maria Śmigel, an inhabitant of Golcowa, who founded both the baby Jesus figurine and the altar itself. She herself was a devout worshipper of baby Jesus in the course of her entire life, and a great propagator of this cult throughout the parish, and she especially mobilized children and young people to worship the child Jesus. The very vivid cult of the infant Jesus survived to the present times, both among parishioners as well as among those who come from Golcowa and now live in other areas of Poland and even abroad. On the northern wall of the presbytery there is the pulpit in the Baroque style. From 1628, between the 5 gold-plated columns there are pictures of 4 evangelists, a painted representation of Jesus in Christophoros style at the back. baptismal font from the end of the 15th century, made of sandstone, bell type, polygonal. Cover of the font from around 1720 Baroque, gilded in the shape of a flattened sphere, made of acanthus leaves, supported on a polygonal basis. In the finale, it depicts the scene of the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan. In the sanctuary we can see a two-sided feretory, on the reverse Our Lady of the Rosary, and on the obverse the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a frame with a chiropractic and cartilaginous ornament, wood carving and gold-plated. The frame comes from the 30s of the 17th century. They are all painted on canvas by Michał Wróblewski around 1850. The spider is suspended in the aisle from the beginning of 19th century. It is triple tiers and has a universal form. Its construction is based on two hoops around which there are candlesticks. The outlines of that makeup consists of run-offs of crystals that form a shelf in the lower part. It is made of bronze and polished crystal. Over here we can see confessional from the second half of the 18th century. In the choir there is an organ prospectus dated after 1800. On the pediment there is an angel statue with a trumpet from the 17th century. Belfry. Behind the sanctuary, from the east side, in the fence of the church square, there is a brick belfry from 1903. It is a screen belfry on the projection of an elongated rectangle, a free-span constructed of ceramic bricks on a base, faced with sandstone, covered with a heaped tin roof, in which 3 bells are mounted on steel rails. In 2013-2014, thoroughly renovated from the foundation to the roof. Granary. Surrounded by a historic church, in the vicinity of the sacristy, there is a granary built in 1922. It is a wooden building on a rectangular plan, one facet, carcass construction with a beaded tail. On a stone foundation, walls covered with shingle, roof covered with titanium zinc sheet. In 2018, extensive conservation and construction works were carried out in order to preserve the historic building from being destroyed and to make available the space previously unused for conducting cultural activities like museum exhibitions or cultural and educational events. Originally, some of the liturgical equipment and liturgical furnishing was stored there. Currently, there is a museum exhibition which will present Parish sacred collection of unique historical and artistic value, including paintings, vessels, robes, and liturgical objects, but also book collection and documents collected over a long period of time. All these objects illustrate the life of the parish and parishioners in Golcowa. Educational classes will also take place there, so-called life history lesson for children and young people from our schools, as well as for tourists coming from all over the world. The above-mentioned values of the historic church complex, together with its equipment, fully justify the desire to save such valuable works of sacred art preserved up to these days, and undertake conservation and restoration works carried out in order to protect them from destruction, and thus make them even more visible the value of this monument together with its surroundings, making it even more available as cultural attractions of the region.